Okay, welcome to our Eid of Shabbat Parashat class. Parashat Vayigash Yosef as the model of pure midot. Yosef HaSadiq is highlighted in Sefer Bereshit. You can say like no one else is. Yaakov Avinu takes up more parashiot, but Yosef in the individual narratives, in the self-contained narratives in the book of Bereshit, is in the spotlight over and over and over again. From Parashat Vayeshev to Mikhes to Vayigash to Vayehi. He is the star of those four parashiot, almost exclusively, with a couple of exceptions in Vayeshev and Vayehi. And we know that Yosef stands for a number of different critical ideas and concepts in Judaism. Probably first and foremost, the idea of Jewish survival and exile and what that should look like and how we should, what is our model, our paradigm in order to be able in Judaism to survive in our long, drawn out, difficult exile. But Yosef HaSadiq did not get that name coincidentally. He earned that name. There's a great movement right now in Judaism. At least it's a video movement called by Ma'in, modeled after what happened in Parashat Mikhes last week, where Yosef refrained. He refrained from being with Potiphar's wife. He showed self-control of his desires, of his physical instincts, of his eyes, etc. And that is among, if not the most critical reason that he is labeled Yosef HaSadiq, the righteous. But he models other types of traits throughout these parashiot. And one of them is not only an incredibly necessary trait to be a servant of Hashem and to perfect our character, but it's also something that Yosef demonstrates as a development of character over the course of his life. And that is the trait of sensitivity or empathy. And really, for a person to be an Ohev Yisrael, for a person to really master this all-encompassing mitzvah, v'ahavta l're'acha kamocha, love thy neighbor, so to speak, which really encompasses many, if not all, of the other positive commandments, ben adam lahavero, including many negative commandments, one must develop his trait and his ability to be sensitive to the fellow man, which means one must think deeply about the emotions and the predicament and the context of the person on the other side of the aisle. And that's what Yosef demonstrates, I would say, more in any other parasha, more than any parashat, Parashat Vayigash. Let's see how, with just a few samples, and what I'd really like to do, which is a little uncharacteristic of this class, is focus Peshat, which is the surface narrative in context, is always the starting point of any discussion on Parashat. But I'd like to focus exclusively on the Peshat without an abundance of commentary or sources from Chazal. Because the beauty of Peshat is that there's a depth without having to dig, if you can buy that. So let's start with, of course, the most dramatic scene. We're in Parashat Vayigash. We're in Perek Memhe, chapter 45, right in the beginning. We know that Yehuda has this powerful and bold presentation to Yosef, unbeknownst to him, Yosef, but really the viceroy and the administrative leader of Misraim, as to how he can't possibly retain Binyamin as a captive over here. It's a master presentation. It's a very bold and brave monologue from Yehuda to your Phyllis, to Yosef. And after that is over, Parashat Memhe is the reaction of Yosef. And the Pasuk tells us in Pasuk Aleph, V'lo yachol Yosef lehitapek v'chol nesabim alav. Most explain lehitapek means that he didn't have enough strength. He couldn't hold himself back. In other words, it was almost like the dam of emotions bursting, and he couldn't can no longer be able to control his emotions, and therefore the time came for him to reveal his true identity. There are those that have if issues with that explanation of hitapech, because what does it have to do with lechol hanisavim alav, for all those who were standing before him? And I saw a wonderful perush of the Kitab Kabbalah that proves through different excerpts in Tanakh that hitapech also means, and there's multiple proofs to this throughout the Tanakh, it means to release, to exit, to go out. And it means in this context that Yosef could not could not let the words come out of his mouth. He had planned all along at some point, and perhaps at this point, this dramatic point, to reveal that he is Yosef, indeed. But he couldn't do it. He couldn't make that revelation, that verbal confession, to all those who were present. That he couldn't do. That he couldn't do. And therefore he said, Vayikra hosiu chol ish me'alai. According to that interpretation of the word hitapek, there's a very smooth transition and understanding and continuation of the pasuk. And therefore he called out and he said, take everyone out of my presence besides my brothers. I don't want anyone else present because it would be wrong for me to reveal myself in the presence to my brothers, in the presence of everybody else. Why? Before I get to the why, really, all the commentaries understand that he wanted privacy, so to speak, and he demanded the exit of all others present for the reason of not embarrassing. It's just that the word hitapek, as I just explained, goes, let's say, more smoothly with the rest of the pasuk. But why is it that he was concerned about what's so embarrassing about revealing himself? And I'll continue the pasuk in a moment, but I'm going to jump to explain that. And that is because in pasuk Gimel, when he reveals himself, pasuk Dalet, he reveals himself as he told his brothers, I'm Yosef, achichem asher mechartem oti Misraima, that you sold to Egypt. That's the Yosef. He felt it necessary, and he knew it was going to be necessary to specifically reveal himself as one who can reveal a detail that no one else could. And that is, don't forget, I'm Yosef that you sold to Egypt. Now, why would he have to do that? It's because, are you sure they're going to buy that this is Yosef? I mean, at first, the first impulse would be, no, you're not Yosef. Okay. You might have found out from somewhere that, because after all, we revealed that there was another brother Ha'ehad Enenu. They said explicitly last week's Parashat. The other one's not here. Okay, so they asked around. They found out who the other one was. And then this guy, who's apparently really pulling their strings for a while now, wants to cause them a little more difficulty. He says, by the way, I'm Yosef. Yeah, it's a good one. Thank you. But the real Yosef is the only one who knows that secret that they have kept inside and not revealed to anyone else all these years. And that is the act of the selling. And so Yosef, who apparently doesn't look like the original Yosef, because they haven't recognized him yet, both physically and in the context of who he really is here, the viceroy of Egypt, they weren't going to figure it out. And they weren't going to certainly buy into it without that detail. And because he had to reveal that detail in order to identify himself as Yosef and let the story move on, he had, therefore, in that great concern that in a public setting, for it now to be revealed that these brothers did what? They sold their brother? That lo yachol hitapek. I can't possibly let those words release from my mouth, l'chol hanisavim alav, to everyone present. How could I cause shame, public shame, to my brothers? And therefore, for the will of Yosef, did not embarrass his brothers. He said, Hosiu kol ish me'alai. And therefore, Pasuk Aleph continues, V'lo amad ish ito b'vada Yosef ele'ahav. No one else was there present when he identified himself. Now, that is really the way, really, all the commentaries you can say, I've seen at least, understand the motive behind why Yosef had to do this. However, what then becomes a difficulty is the continuation. Pasuk bet. Vayiten et kolo b'bchi, vayishmi'u Misraim, vayishma bet Yosef. In other words, he called out, when he said Ani Yosef, he was sobbing, he was crying. And somehow Misraim, you think things get around in this community. Misraim heard about this without telephones and Kal Vachomer, internet and WhatsApp. They heard about it, and certainly Bet Yosef, Bet Par'ah rather, Bet Par'ah, meaning the office of the government, definitely heard of it. So how did that happen? Well, some say they heard it on the way out, right? In other words, like they're still in the hallway, they're in the vestibule, they're outside the palace, and he cried, called out, Ani Yosef. They heard it, but Pshat that most understand is that somehow the word got out. But the question is, of course, if that word got out, so then how did he save them from the embarrassment anyway? Doesn't that defeat the purpose? And the answer is, this is where the incredible sensitivity of Yosef is on display. And that is, what word got out? The word that got out was Ani Yosef, which is that indeed the leader here in Egypt has brothers. Oh, and these guys that were coming back and forth, they were probably in prison, etc., are his brothers. That got out. What didn't get out, because he made sure to remove everyone else from the room, and that is Asher mechartem oti Misraima, that you sold me to Egypt. That act, that stayed on the QT. In other words, Yosef did not, this is what the Orah Hayim explains. He didn't mind embarrassing himself. He didn't mind that the word got out that this big boy is crying and revealing himself. And he's got emotions after all. That was okay with him. And that was going to happen anyway. But what wasn't okay was at the expense of his brother's shame. And therefore, he said, remove everyone. Let no one know about that detail so that they don't feel embarrassed. Myself, okay, Vayishma Misraim and Bet Par'ah. He's a crybaby, whatever they want to say on the front page the next day. Look at the big boy crying, right, on the front page of the Post or whatever, right? That's okay. That's okay. As long as it doesn't say in the subtitle afterwards, could you believe they sold him? As long as it doesn't say that, I'm okay. So the extent of his sensitivity and not wanting to, hurt his brothers in any way, shape, or form, and cause their pride and their integrity to be damaged whatsoever, I'm okay with looking silly myself, as long as they don't. Now that is sensitivity attached to self-sacrifice. And that's who Yosef became. And I'll show you shortly what I mean by became. But first, two other examples in the Pshat of Yosef's sensitivity. First of all, in the ensuing conversation. So he revealed himself, and it says in Pasuk Gimel, of course, they were speechless, they were dumbfounded. They were in shock, quite frankly. Their jaws dropped. They couldn't say a word. They were frozen in their tracks. And Yosef therefore said, Gishuna Eli. I know. Don't say anything. I got it. Just come closer. And he started to then explain. He says, I'm Yosef who sold you. Indeed, it's me, Yosef. But look at what he expresses, both in Pasuk He and Pasuk Het. Something amazing. Ve'ata al te'asebu ve'al yichad be'anechem ki mechatem oti henna. Don't be sad. Don't feel bad. Don't get down on yourselves that you sold me here because God sent me here to sustain everyone. And again in Pasuk Het, Ve'ata, lo atem shelachtem oti hena ki ha'Elohim. You didn't send me here. God sent me here. Now we got used to hearing these words of Yosef every year, over and over again. We perhaps have become desensitized to these words. Let's put this in context over here. Really, if this happened to anyone, I mean, any one of us, and anyone that we know, it's one thing to go beyond the anger and to get beyond the resentment and not demonstrate that you still have ill feelings towards someone else, but to resist the temptation of at least acknowledging the moment, all the suffering. He went through suffering because of this. He was a young man sold into slavery in a foreign environment, in culture shock for years, and then in prison, then bringing up a family on a strange land. And for him not to have that desire to at least say, how could you, how'd you do it? How'd you let me suffer? You know what I'm talking about, guys, right? You know, you remember that, right? To refrain from a single word of vengeance, or at least reminding, to be able to say, I need Yosef and identify the scene without actually harping on it or pointing fingers. The amount of self-control and emotional maturity that took is incredible. But how about the sensitivity? How about the fact that in and of itself, just saying Ani Yosef makes them feel as low as you can possibly feel? That's enough. I don't have to add on to that, says Yosef. And indeed, he didn't. He didn't take advantage of what was an opportune moment, really, for any of us to remind or to question. Waited so long. Who of us wouldn't at least remind or wouldn't want to know why? I don't want to know why. Way moved on. Incredible. And then I want to show you one more example, and then I'm going to reflect. Now, of course, catches up, cries, hugs, go get my father. Paro finds out. He says, hey, this is great news. Go back. Don't worry about your stuff. I'll set you up over here. You'll be regular residents. Okay? And they're going to go back. And then fast forward to Pasuk Kaf Dalet. Yosef says, all right, Alamak, you're on your way. Vayshalach decha vayelechu, vayomer alehem. He sent to them, they left. And he told them, I guess he said this before they left, right? This was the parting message. And now leaving means weeks at least, right? Al tirgezu badarech. Al tirgezu badarech. The Targum Unkelu says, La titnisun be'orha. Don't fight on the way. There are others that say, Lo al tirgezu baderech means don't get involved in discussion or don't anger. And all of that points to the same place. And that is what is obviously the tendency and what would be the natural ensuing discussion and engagement between them. Blame games, finger pointing. After all, he knows that Reuben had a great attempt to save his life. Yehuda actually afterwards, although some say it was cowardly, but did save his life by pointing him into slavery. Who knows who was the more and less guilty party? There's all types of guesses among the Mefarshim. But certainly there is not a all for one and one was not an all for one and one for all effort at the time. And this is a crisis, an emotional and a religious crisis for the brothers. And Yosef, in his sensitivity and empathy, said, listen, it doesn't pay. I'm over it. Get over it. Al tirgezu. No more discussion. Close the chapter. It's over. Amazing. Now, I said incredible trait and sensitivity, but I want to just show you what development means. No one starts off great. No one starts off perfect. No one's a malach. We're all human beings. And that's the greatness of our avot and our heroes, is that they developed into greatness. And what do we see going back 2 parashiot ago, Vayeshev? What's our original picture of Yosef? That the Torah minces no words and really paints us in a very blatant way in 2 different episodes and scenes. Right at the beginning, Parashat Vayeshev, it says, Vayose Yosef et dibatam ra'a el abihem. That Yosef was not very concerned about their pride, about public impression, about their the impression of their integrity. Quite the contrary. He willfully, of course, in a manner that he felt was justified, but in a very less mature way, was putting them on trial. The Batam Ra'an, take your choice of commentaries and midrashim, whatever that means, but it certainly was derogatory, it wasn't positive. And despite justice, here he could have stuck up for justice, but he was more concerned for their shame. It was the opposite in the early days. He was just worried about, the letter of the law. Let's speak it out. Let's just say it. Their standing. Okay, that wasn't a thing. Wasn't an issue. And how about when he reveals the dream? How insensitive was that? Revealing the dreams, the truth, it's a premonition, it's a nevuah, it's a prophecy. He's brilliant, yes, he's close to God, but did you have to say that? And of course, Vayigash Abib, and Yaakov rebuked him. I'm not rebuking Yosef HaSadik. Yaakov Abinu rebuked him. He says, what are you implying, right? What are you trying to say right now, Yosef? And therefore, him, in trying to get to the truth, was completely insensitive in his path towards that. Yosef, over these years of difficulties, and this is what great people do, they grow and develop through their tests and trials and tribulations, through the difficulties in life. They don't let life stomp on their heads and bring them down. They allow their test to elevate them and the difficulties in life to develop and perfect themselves in their character. And now you see Yosef on the other side, after all the difficulties, not as a bitter, not as a resentful, not as an insensitive person, but instead quite the contrary. There is no coincidence here that Vayeshev and Vayigash begin in completely opposite ways, because you see a man who's come full circle and indeed is an absolute paradigm and model for his future nation and offspring as what fine midot, what beautiful character, what self-control and what sensitivity really means. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen v'amen. Shabbat shalom.
So Rabbi, he put